really quick recap. We introduced the concept of an integrated multi-tiered system of support. And we talked about how this is built off of the research from Nation at Hope that had these 6 recommendations of what you should do when you are implementing or what changes need to occur in a school system to support the whole child. And so part of that recommendation is looking at the whole child, the social, emotional, the behavior, and the academics, not just focusing on one or the other, that we need to look at all of it. How do we create an environment that's conducive for learning? And how that we need to support our adults in the system so that they understand developmental, that they can support the students in front of them and understand why maybe sometimes what we're expecting might be just beyond what they're able to do, versus are we challenging them enough, and how all of that plays out, as well as doing a better job, I guess is a better word to put there, doing a better job of connecting research into practice. And so to help us with that, we also looked at our continuum of support. And we talked about how everybody is aware of our triangles, but how we need to focus on tier 1. That foundational piece is so important when we're looking at a multi-tiered system, that we need to be putting more focus on the instruction and the interventions, and that it means it's all students. And so it doesn't stop here, it goes all the way to the top. And when a child needs more, the targeted and the intensive is layered onto it. It's not in place of. And so we spent some time talking about that. We also talked about how an integrated MTSS model focuses not just on the instruction and the intervention and the data that we look at to identify students and progress monitoring, but it's also what's below that red line around the leadership, and that we need to make sure that in the system we're building the capacity and the infrastructure to support this work, and how are we communicating and collaborating with each other so that we can support the instruction and the intervention and the looking at the data, and that we're evaluating, that we have data. That's the first question. Do we even have data? It's a good data. And what are we doing with that data? So we talked a little bit about that is important for our integrated system. The next piece is there are a lot of these parts already existing in a school system, in a district. But right now, they're pieces, they're like all over. And we're just trying to put all the pieces together. And that's what this framework is about. How do you support putting all the pieces together so that they're working together, collaborating together to work smoothly? And so with that integration, then we have that coherence. So if you're focusing with a school district, that there's that coherence across the district. No matter what school a child goes to, they have that equity and access, that there's this threshold that is the same. Or if you're leading in a school building, that that there's coherence no matter what classroom a child is receiving their instruction in, that they have the same equity and access, and at the end that we are providing those sustainable systems, that it's not this work and then when somebody leaves, it leaves, or the next thing comes in, that we are able to sustain it. So today we're going to focus on the leadership component of supporting a integrated multi-tiered system of support. And so always we love to start with, what does the research say on this? And so the model that we're going to be talking about stems from the research from Anderson and Anderson, who talks about these are the steps, these are the stages that you need to go through when you're implementing change, strategic plans, action plans, gathering data or implementing, gathering the data, making the decision, what's working, what's not. But then also looking at what Cotter says about leadership change and how he says it's about bringing the people along. And how do you bring the people along? How do you touch their minds and their hearts so that they want to do the work? And so we blended these two models with the work that we have been doing, and we came up with the 8 Bs of leading change. And so we're going to go through these 8 Bs of leading change. I'm going to share a little theory, and Renee's going to give some actionable items that our USD has been doing to implement a very large initiative in a very large district across all 50 sites. So the first one is creating a guiding coalition. You cannot do this alone. When you are implementing or you're working with a school district or a school site, it's about how do you create a team. And this team needs to represent your educational partners, both within and out in the community. So for instance, you want to look at what are your student population, special ed or EL or the different services that they represent and their needs. You want to make sure you have all the different levels represented. If it's a district and if they are K-12, you want to make sure your high schools, your middle school, your elementary, and preschool, if you have preschool programs, are all represented because they have different needs. You want to make sure that teachers, admin, district level individuals are represented, as well as community. So your parent groups, and actually if you are your unions, and if you're connected to other community entities very close in your working with your district, you would want to invite them so that they can help you to see if there's any blind spots, giving you feedback, but also you help them to see that there's a need. You touch their heart, and their mind to support that. Renee, do you want to give an example of how Riverside has been working through that?
I do. One practical recommendation that I have is to make a list of roles or attributes that you want represented in the guiding coalition and then choose the people. Because otherwise you could find yourself with a bunch of early adopters and enthusiastic people, and you're not really getting a great read across the organization. So if you want people who work with students with special needs, with English learners, classified teammates, teachers, the levels of teachers, and for Riverside Unified, different parts of town because of different socioeconomics. So I would say make a list of attributes that you want represented on that team, and then do it. For me, it helps to truly model shared leadership. Superintendents often talk about shared leadership, but this is one way to truly model it. And if you have people, one thing that was important to us is to make sure we had people in each division, because then that way we kind of had a built-in cross-organizational integration.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, and that was very important, which they did. And that helped to lead, because your guiding coalition is going to help write that strategic plan, that action plan of what are we going to do in the long run? Where do we want to go? What are the different pieces that we want to end with? And the other piece that the guiding coalition helps with, as Simon Sinek always says, you need to have a strong, powerful why. And because people are not going to buy into, hey, we're going to do MTSS. They're going to be like, yeah, one more thing. Here we go again. But they will buy into why we're doing this. And the more powerful your why, the easier it is for people to get on with it or on board with it. And one of the things that Riverside Unified did an amazing job with, and still is doing, is starting with the why. And I'll let Renee share a little bit about how they've embedded that.
So this why is actually our mission statement. So it probably looks familiar to a lot of you, but we weren't I would say, living up to the words that you see in color, so that classrooms weren't necessarily engaging or innovative, and we needed more attention on making sure that equitable experiences were available. And then that very little but very difficult word, all, for each and every one of our students. So we combine, and now every presentation, every talk that I give to managers starts with our mission, which is our why, and then goes on to, I think you have the next one, Gail, our values, because that's sort of how we work out our mission. Our mission is to use our values, and then also our equity tenets, because just with our socio-political environment these days, a lot of people want to shy away from equity, but our equity tenets really guide work throughout the district. And it is what will help us to get to each and every student. So virtually everything starts with mission, values, and equity tenets.
And I just recently this week did a presentation in Riverside Unified, and not that I put those slides in, but the district leader that was working with us started with grounding. Here's our why. This is why we're here today. This is, and the equity definition, their MTSS definition, and here's the piece we're working on today. And doesn't matter what meeting or training I'm in, they always have started with the why. So going along with starting with the why is having that strong communication plan. That is so needed. And you need to start communicating out early. And it needs to be clear what is going to be the benefits and what is going to happen. And it needs to happen throughout the whole process. You need to be consistent with what you're communicating, and you need to come up with a variety of methods and a variety of venues to communicate in. And when you think, oh my gosh, I already said this, you need to say it some more. Renee, do you want to share a little bit about the value of communication in a
Yes,
large?
so we have a lot of systems built in for communication. One we call the circles of communication, so that when decisions are made by the board or by the cabinet, it's shocking how often I have to still bring out this image so that we make sure to get to all the levels, so that we talk to the leadership team first, so that they have the knowledge before we talk to employees and our bargaining units, our unions, and then to families and then to the community. We our MTSS effort, we talked about it in cabinet. I frequently talked about it to the board. And to Gail's point of that, you just have to keep repeating the same messages, your why, and actions that you're doing. This is my 4th year as superintendent, and at the end of the year, when I was doing a recap for the board about focus for this year, that we really, really were going to focus on first learning, and I took them through the improvements that we had made over the years. One of my board members, who has been here the whole time, said with genuine surprise, "I'm so happy to know that there's a strategy behind what you've been doing." After I regrouped myself, because I nearly lost my mind, it was just another reminder that you have to repeat, get some of your same messages to repeat, stay consistent, and communicate often, even if you feel like you're repeating things that you already said or did.
Yeah, they've been working on this for 4 years, and all 4 years has been in front of the board, the messaging. So thank you for sharing that. I was being very vulnerable, Renee. Thank you for sharing that. The next piece is super important. I think this is where some districts get maybe stymied with the work, or even a site. It's coming up with a smaller work group. It could be personnel that or people that are part of your guiding coalition. They could be additional people that are added to the smaller work group, but it's this group who is going to build, implement, and have the daily oversight of whatever your initiative, especially a multi-tiered system of support that is very complex, that they are helping to get the work out there. They're helping with the communication, the collaboration, just all of the moving parts. I call it making sure all the plates are spinning in the process. You want to share a little bit about how, as leading those working groups?
So again, I would say make sure you have an idea of what attributes or departments you want represented, what programs you want represented, so that your work group has all of the knowledge, skills, and dispositions that you want. For me, this is really what helps make the sustainability. Besides also modeling shared leadership, that working group will have the knowledge of why decisions were made, why we're implementing certain things when, and it's not just invested in a single person. So even if a person is facilitating the working group, each person should have critical roles and critical roles for communicating the work to different areas. So we had presentations, for example, with cabinet, like I said, in the board, but also with leadership. And then I had two cabinet members who in their because I wasn't in every meeting, but cabinet members in their one-on-ones with me updated me on the work of the working group. And we even incorporated it into with our principal evaluators, our principal supervisors, you might call them. The working group updated principal supervisors so that when supervisors were working with principals, they were looking for evidence of the work.
Right. And then I just want to add another piece. As different components were coming up, new smaller working groups might be started. So for example, a working group around discipline was started and then it was dissolved when it was no longer needed. Another one around their SST process was started. So as different areas, we would create another smaller work group because we knew the importance for the building and the implementation and that oversight piece as different pieces, but there was still the connection to the work throughout work group, back to guiding coalition information. The other piece before I jump to the next little bead is that work group, when they first come together, you start back with what is the strategic plan for the group, right? What is their why? Building off of the district's why. What is, just all of those pieces. How are they going to communicate out all of the pieces? Because now they're just a smaller component of that implementation. So you're still utilizing that leading change components. I just wanted to add that. Part of what that work group is going to be doing is professional learning, and the professional learning was the strategy utilized to help ensure we have consistency with language, knowledge, that common understanding. How do we collaborate, making sure that they have the skills necessary to do the work that is needed. And it wasn't just focusing on the classroom teacher or the site level administrator or the site leadership team. It was also ensuring across the district, everybody understood. So when Renee mentioned divisions, it was about instructional services, understanding what pupil student services were doing and vice versa. And how do they work together? Because there's a lot of times that they crossed over. It was about HR understanding what was happening in instructional services and in student services so that they could provide support. It was about even the CBO understanding so that when there were requests that she understood, oh, this is why you're asking for. Let's see how we can make this happen. So there's a lot of going across division at the district level with professional learning, joint together, as well as the sites and support services. Renee, you want to share a little bit about some of those unique pieces that you guys put into play to?
Sure. In our district, we brought together, we call them SLT, school leadership teams. It's not, this was specifically for MTSS. So the principal and the members of the school leadership team came together multiple times per year, 5 or 6. It was the work of the school, 5. It was the work of the school leadership team to listen to what the guiding coalition was talking about and the working groups and figure out how it was to be implemented at their particular site. Riverside Unified was decentralized a long time ago, so I'm not one of those superintendents who can just tell people what to do. I tell them where we're going, what our hope is, and then they figure out how to manifest it at their own site. But all of them made their plans right in the room. So that was for site level. And then at the divisions, people in instructional services had to learn what the SLT groups were learning so that they could embed it into their practice with teachers. People in pupil services, like Gail said, had to learn. 8 people in HR had to, so when we hired a support role, for example, for MTSS, they had to help with what was the timing, how we were going to make sure we weren't taking all of the talent out of classrooms right away. So the work that the SLTs were learning about was implemented in different venues throughout the district. First with the school leadership teams and those 5 times that they were meeting, but then the other divisions had to accommodate that work also.
And so as Renee mentioned, there was, here's what we're doing, but honoring the context and the culture of of each school site. And she made a statement at the very beginning. For her, she always has to make sure she's representing all the different areas of Riverside Unified because they are very distinct and they have distinct needs. And so by doing this helped the school sites to say, okay, this is what I need to implement. This is when I need to implement this component. And then from a district point of view, they were like, okay, here's what we need to train on. Here's the skills we need to ensure that our site admin and our leadership teams at the site have. And oh, let's look back. What do we have as knowledge and skills within our district for this? And what do we need to train up or ensure that exists so that we can support the sites to be able to do the work? And so the other good part about coming up with the short-term deliverables, when you look at a multi-tiered system of support, it's a very complex initiative. There's many complex initiatives out there. They become overwhelming and you don't know where to begin or what should I do, or it feels like all of it needs to be done today. And so this one piece right here helped the district make momentum the most once they took a step back and said, okay, what if we can get this one piece done by this school year, what would give us the biggest bang? And I think when that was determined, and I'm assuming cabinet, because I keep hearing Renee said, but I'll let Renee talk about what was determined. And once that was there, it just took off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's just really outcome and goal setting. So we had deliverables for the sites. So last August, that classroom behavior expectations would be aligned to school expectations. So they already had school expectations. Now we're getting down to the classroom level because we have an expectation that every classroom has a well-articulated classroom management plan with expectations that it's communicated to families. So then that becomes, for me, it's a vehicle of celebrations and storytelling because the board sees this, the cabinet sees this. Then I tell stories about, well, I saw the classroom behavior expectations posted in this place, that, and what it helped. It also helps with accountability because then when anybody's out there, they know that sites had a certain deliverables and the district overall had certain deliverables. So the district is our promise to the teams of what we're going to do and then what we're going to support at the sites. So the district deliverables at the end of last year, by the end of last year, we're to have our year 3 plan implemented, and that 80% of people will leave with a plan to apply what they learned into their practice. If you can go to the next one, I think.
Can I just
Yeah,
add one thing? When you
please.
saw the August of 2023,
Yeah.
that was our guiding post for the 22-23 school year,
Mm-hmm.
was to get them, and there were some breakdowns of what the sites had to have in place around, we were really focusing on the behavior part. Remember, Nation at Hope says, create an environment conducive for learning, and that was the goal that they, as a district, decided to focus on. Let's get the learning environments stable.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, 22-23 was broken down to get them to be able to rock and roll on August 2023 with that expectation. So just so you could see how that played out with what was done with SLTs. So, okay. So share
And so,
your
yeah, and telling some of those stories, I did want to talk about some outcomes because I know everyone's interested to know how did it work. So year 1 for us was a big focus on social emotional learning. We implemented a screener. We implemented classroom community practices. And over the years, we've been able to have increasingly more students in the low risk category for social emotional. Behavior, thank you, was really impacted. So we changed our behavior model, as you saw with the deliverables, to talk about expectations, teaching behaviors, redirecting behaviors before you get to consequences, and really communicated that we're not telling you to let go of consequences. We're just saying put some foundational work ahead of that, beginning with school community and then safety, teaching behaviors, and then get to discipline. And so over time, we have seen a big decrease in our ed code violations for students. And just for me, just the calmness over campuses has been palpable when you're on campuses. That extended to suspensions, and then also to our academic work. So laying that foundation of first SEL, then behavior, then planning for instructional impact, and now implementing instructional impacts has gotten us some improvement over time.
Mm-hmm. And the district's big focus starting last year, but actually this year is now on the academics. Not saying they ignored academics, but now is their big focus of refining around that area. So memorializing is going to be a big piece. Here's all this work that's being done, but now how do we memorialize that so that it can be sustainable and ongoing, and as new people come on board, or even people that are already in the district, they know what is expected. And so a couple of pieces that need to be looked at is what are your board policies? And do your board policies support the work that you're doing? There was a lot, not a lot, there were some board policies that needed to be tweaked and a couple that needed to be added to support the work. Also looking at procedures and guidelines. And I'm going to talk about a piece that was identified pretty early on to support this work. The district was really focusing, leading with interventions. And you heard Renee mention that they were focusing on what can we do to get in front of, how can we support students? It's not all about the consequences, but when you look at their guidelines around behavior, that was not what was said. And so there was this disconnect. And so there was a work group that was pulled together that revised their guidelines as the sites were working on implementing in the district. They call it their behavior system, but in theory, it's built off of PBIS, but their behavior system, as the sites were building their behavior system, the district had a team that came together representing everybody, like we talk about, and they looked at the guidelines and rewrote it so that it still has consequences, it still meets ed code, but it leads with interventions. And so both behavior system implemented and that guideline implemented August of 2023. You want to share anything else about the memorializing?
I think that's good. I just things that we had to change. We had to change board policies, the student handbook, the discipline guidelines, um, and more even in just classroom communication to parent, classroom and school communication about things that were going to happen in school.
Awesome. Yes. And then the last bead is on continuous improvement, making sure you have a system that's set up from the district looking at this, district teams, as well as site leadership team, as well as grade level and department teams, that they're constantly looking at the data and that there is a system to look at the data, and that it's not just admiring the data, but actually creating action plans, implementing those action plans, gathering more data, and determining what next. And not just looking at it to identify students who might be at risk. That's important, but you need to look at, how is our system working? Is it working correctly? Do we need to make some tweaks? But along with creating that system, like here's how we do it, you need to make sure that your staff know how to do it. Do they know how to have constructive, collaborative conversations? And last year we spent a lot of time just talking about how do we have conversations together utilizing that. Renee, do you want to share?
Nothing to add there.
Okay, so we shared a lot. I want to just share real quickly some tools that Rada is going to send to you to help you with implementation or supporting. One is the stages of implementation. You're going to receive a checklist that shows these 4 stages, and you can identify where the district, the school site that you're supporting is at. Are they in exploration? Are they in installation building? Are they just initially implementing? Or are they in a full implementation? It's sustainable, it's there. So it gives you some questions to identify that. It also talks about, it's a lot of times in schools, we get to year 2 or 3 and we stop because they don't see the return on, like, oh, it's not working. But a lot of times we never got past the building of it. So this is a tool to help with that. You'll also receive the 8 beads to leading change and a checklist into each area of what should you consider, and also an action planning document to help guide you or the district or the site you're working with. And then this is actually another tool from Noster. A lot of times when we're implementing something, sometimes we receive some resistance, some pushback. So we thought we will give you this tool, even though we didn't really talk about that. So on the right-hand side might be the feeling or that you're sensing, you're seeing, you're hearing. And so you look at that. So say, for example, you're hearing people say, oh my gosh, I'm really feeling anxious about this, or you can hear the anxiety in their voice. You go to the left on the document and where it says missing, that's what you can focus on. So typically when people are feeling anxious, oh, they're missing a skill. They don't know how to do this. Let me back this up and make sure they have that. Or if they're feeling the frustration, oh, we don't have a resource. Either they don't resource as in time or resource as in, again, a strategy of how to do it, or maybe it is a missing individual to provide that support. But that gives you a place to start so you can figure out how do I best move and help and support that moving forward.